All right, we are starting Unit 7, the final unit of Algebra 2 today. Unit 7 is a stats unit, statistics unit. So I want to first quickly talk about these listed notes, and then I have some examples that we'll go through. So lesson 1 starts talking about the concept of a statistical study or a statistical question. And as it says here, a statistical study or a statistical question is simply a question that can be answered by collecting data. Anything that you can answer by collecting data is a statistical question or study. And for this unit, we're going to focus on the three different types of statistical studies. We have a survey, an observational study, an experimental study. Okay. Um, and a lot of them are pretty self explanatory. A survey is what you think it is. So a survey is a set of questions given to people to seek their responses. So that could be something as simple as an email survey or the surveys that they sometimes put at the bottom of receipts at the stores um, to get responses. Those are all surveys. Okay. An observational study is when you're actually collecting data without influencing the subjects directly. So you're simply observational. Sounds like observe. So in an observational study, you're simply just observing people to see what they do. You're not directly influencing. You're not imposing treatment on them, etc. An experimental study is like your classic scientific method. So, an experimental study collects data by directly influencing something to determine how another thing is changed. So, a typical experimental study would be like, for example, when they did the trials for the COVID vaccines. They directly influenced the results. They gave some of the people the vaccine, and they gave some of the people what they call a placebo, a different medicine, and they see how they react to the vaccine to see if it works. Pretty much any medicine or drug trial is what we call an experimental study. You directly influence people by giving them the medicine and seeing if their condition improves or not. So that's an experimental study. It involves random assignment to a treatment group. So if you're comparing two different medicines, say, and you have your participants, you have to assign them randomly to whatever group that they're going to be in order to make the results less biased. An experimental study is important because that's the only type of statistical study that can determine causation. In other words, that is the only type of study that can prove a cause and effect relationship. Surveys and observational studies can only determine associations. All right, but they do not prove cause effect relationships. So whatever study you choose, whether it's a survey, an observational study, or an experimental study, there are things that a researcher needs to consider when doing that. Okay. Number one, selecting subjects that are representative of the larger population. In other words, you want your participants in the study to be representative of the entire population. So, in other words, you want a diverse sample of people. You don't want to have just old people. You don't want to have just young people. You don't want to have just boys or just girls. You want to have a diverse set of subjects. Eliminating bias by selecting subjects randomly. Okay. Anything that could potentially skew the results could negatively affect the study. Not asking leading questions. Okay, leading questions meaning questions that lead the respondent to one response versus the other. That could bias the results. Data needs to be collected and analyzed fairly. The data collected needs to be directly related to the question, meaning directly related to whatever you're studying. And you need to have a large enough sample size to minimize variability. In other words, if you're going to do a study, you don't just do it on one person. You don't just do it on 10 people. You want to have a lot. You want to have a lot of participants. For example, when they did the drug trials for the COVID vaccines, they had thousands of people participating in it. They didn't just have a handful of people. So that's what a statistical study is about. Let's go ahead and take a look at the examples here. So here are our examples. A production studio is interested in what type of movie people would like to see when movie theaters reopen. A romantic comedy, an action/drama, or an animated family movie. Explain why it is better to select people for the survey using a random process rather than only selecting people who say they go to the movies with their children. Okay? So explain why it is better to select people for the survey using a random process rather than only selecting people who say they go to the movies with their children. So let's think about this here. What would happen if you only talked to people who went to the movies with their children? That would certainly bias the results because they would be probably more inclined to go with the animated family movie. Okay, that would not be representative of the entire population as a whole. That would be representative of people who go to the movies with their children, but it would not be the entire population of the country. So it would certainly lead to biased results. Okay, so to answer the question, okay, those people would be more inclined to answer animated family movie. Okay, right? People who go to the movies with their children would be more inclined to answer with that, and thus this, whoops, and thus this would lead to biased results. Okay, if you're selecting people randomly, if you're selecting people randomly, the odds of having biased results go down drastically. So that answers question number one.